into our first conversation on this Monday morning, where we are taking a deeper look at the Social Security Fund. We're joined this morning by Senator for the Private Sector, Senator MarkLlizarraga. Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you so much for having me here this morning.
Now, to be clear before we start, you were once a board member on the Social Security Board, and you left that position in 2014, right?
Yes.
So you'll be able to kind of set some background as to how the functions of the Social Security Board work, and also just having us understand more clearly whether or not the mechanisms that are in place are effective, non-effective, performing, not performing, in today's conversation.
Well, thank you for giving me this opportunity. I want to start first by setting a backdrop.
Yes.
The Social Security Board has been in need of a lot of reform, legislative reform. Going way back, we all know that there were some issues with how should I say? There were some issues where I believe, even though we had good intentions in certain places, management did not follow through with making sure all the T's were crossed and all the I's were dotted. We've seen many good projects come through the Social Security Board, or many well-intended projects, but the implementation of those projects were not handled properly, absolutely. But following up on this legislative review, there were certain weaknesses, and I would say that the main issue is probably the composition of the board. The board is still government run, basically. The government holds the majority on the boards, on both boards of the Social Security Board, and as such, government's will be done.
There are representatives of the private sector, though.
There are. We do have, and I must say that after the reform started coming about at Social Security, those eyes on the board contributed a lot to the tightening of many loose areas, let's say that. But there still remains a need for legislative reforms. One of which I might add that was a campaign promise for this government, was that they would change the composition of the board, where the government no longer enjoyed the majority on that board. That was never done. And there are a host of other legislative reforms that even the Social Security, its actuary, and the Belize Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the business community recognizes that still needs to be carried out. We are here today primarily because we have not effected those reforms at Social Security that we need to put into effect for the tightening of the fund, for the safety of the fund, and for the good management of the fund.
When we say social partner majority in respect of the composition of the board, what would we have been looking for in terms of numbers? How many to one, or
I think the government enjoys 5 seats right now, including the chair. And the social partners have 4 seats. I think the board is big enough. I think if we had one more social partner, one less government partner, then I think that projects and investments particularly would be looked at more objectively, based not on the will of the government, but on the merits of the investment.
Yeah.
And I think that is what we need. I would like to make some corrections here. That we've been hearing that these increases that are being proposed will be brought into effect over 3 years. That is absolutely not true. These increases will be brought into effect in 1.5 years. Okay, the final increase being proposed is for January 2021. Also, there is this. People are saying, there's a 2% increase. Oh, that's not much. That's absolutely not true. The rate has changed from 8 to 10%. That's a 25% increase in premiums. That is substantial. You're talking about another $20 million being sucked out of our economy in an already highly taxed environment. Belizeans contribute to the national tax base almost 30% of GDP. we're taxed almost 30% of GDP. And now, to add to that, a 25% increase in premiums, 30, and then, taking from 8 to 10, you're talking about now, almost 40%. That's a heavy burden in today's day when people are in need of money. We see the social fabric of our country deteriorating, and people are already overtaxed and overburdened.
The truth of the matter is, Senator, when you look at it from a broad perspective, everything seems to be going up except salaries. So that the cost of living is already through the roof. Then now you're looking at an increase in contributions, but your base pay remains the same. And the minimum wage doesn't increase either to be able to meet certain areas of expenses.
Well, our economy has been pretty stagnant. And there's a whole host of reasons that is so. Unless you can stimulate your economy, you can't go to business people right now and tell them raise minimum wage, because the people, it has to be as a part of a strategy of growth, and it has to be driven by growth. But I'd like to get back to Social Security, because we don't have a lot of time, and there are some areas that I really want to cover. Because of government's control on this board, we have been hit with the major two things that have impacted the performance of this fund to where it is today: the NHI, National Health Insurance, and the non-contributory pension schemes. Those are the first big culprits. Combined, they would have had an effect roughly close to $100 million. Remember, this is an insurance scheme. You pay premiums that are shared by the employer and the employee. Primarily, the burden is more so on the employer than the employee. But these premiums are designed to cover certain things. To cover employment injuries, to cover pensions, to cover sicknesses, maternity, death benefits. So when the actuary makes his calculations to say how much I'm going to charge you, it's based on the needs of those branches. When the fund was designed, and this was a well-designed fund, the fund was very liquid, obviously, because you have to contribute all your working life. The fund will grow, and then when you reach retirement, then you start pulling down, right?
Or
your
if you
money.
get ill.
Yeah. So by its very nature, being a young fund, it grew, and it acquired a lot of capital. And if you have money without serious controls, you know what happens to politicians' eyes. So we embarked on these projects that put a big hit on the fund. We, the social partners, lobbied very much for them to be removed from the burden that they were placing on Social Security. Yeah.
Can I ask a question here? And I would want to approach from the layman's point of view. We pay contributions to SSB on a weekly, bi-weekly, monthly basis, depending on how you are paid. And so you accrue an amount of money with the fund or in the fund. The SSB has never come to the Belizean public, those of us who are contributors, to ask us how they should invest our monies. They just, in my opinion, decide on their own where they want to place the monies. I'll get to the point of my question. If I am not mistaken, in 2014, monies were used to bail out the citrus industry. They never came to the Belizean populace and said, look, is this an okay investment with you? They just proceeded to do what they had to do. And now they come back 5 years later and saying, well, look, we're damn near bankrupt, or we're out of funds and we need to implement this new scheme to be able to recover or make back certain monies. I believe, my opinion here, that perhaps that's a bit unfair to the average person.
Well, as an employee, you have representatives on the board. You're represented by the unions. And I must say this in all fairness. I think non-performing loans, let's look back at the securitization and that whole scandal, so to speak, if you want to have it, call it a scandal. Its impact was $8 million, I understand. I understand today the non-performing section of the portfolio is about 1%, maybe a $4 to $5 million. In the scope of the fund, those are not big hits.
Okay.
The big hits are the 100 million I spoke to you about, you know, the NHI and the NCP, non-contributory pension scheme, where people who have not contributed
are drawing
benefits. Exactly.
Yeah.
So were it not for those, and we, as I said, when I was on the board, one of the big things we were fighting for was to get these burdens off.
Now, I just, and that's exactly where I wanted to jump in, because I think when people think about the fact that they have to contribute to the Social Security Fund, the two programs that you're speaking of are a very important social safety net for the poor in this country. People who are reliant on getting health care through NHI in select parts of the countries, and people who will retire and possibly have absolutely nothing to sustain themselves on.
Absolutely. We are not disputing the fact of the need for a social safety net. Absolutely. Please don't get me wrong. But the question is, who pays for it? We're here today because the funds were abused, really. And we have, in addition to that, we have extremely high administrative expenses. We have a lot of what the Social Security refers to as evasion, abuse, and fraud in the system. We have an investment portfolio that perhaps needs to be a lot more vibrant and varied because it's not bringing the returns that it used to bring. At one time, the Social Security Fund was very comfortable in holding its money in the banks because the banks were paying 9 and 10%.
Yeah.
So it could be very conservative, and it was doing well. It was doing far better than the 7% actuarial obligations.
Yeah, but now
it's changed.
Yeah.
So these are not things that came upon us overnight. You know, these things crept up on us. But in typical fashion, the legislators, the politicians, will not address it until you get to this point. Then they come to the business community, and the business community, being the responsible people that they are, recognizing the importance of the Social Security, are saying, okay, we have to pay it under certain conditions. And I think that the business community has demonstrated good faith in consulting with its members and in agreeing to these stopgap measures, because we still have not addressed many of the reforms that need to be addressed to fix the system. And we will have to address it again. We'll be back at the same place. After this 25% increase, we'll be back at the same place in 2024-25 because systemic issues in the fund have not been addressed legislatively primarily for too long.
One of those issues, and I've heard the president of the Chamber of Commerce speak of this, is that there is a need to reduce the operating cost at the Social Security Board. And in fact, it is one of the pertinent issues that has been put out there, although we haven't heard any commitment on behalf of SSB that they will.
Well, in all fairness to SSB, I think they have come up with a proposal that will see them realize roughly $1 million over the next few years, which is commendable. It should have been done a long time ago. But I forgot my point. No,
I'm talking about reducing operational costs.
But besides operational costs, thank you. Besides operational costs, one of the big things is we have non-compliant contributors. We have people who evade it. We're only collecting from about 70% of that 100% task workforce. So if we, and I must say, one of the programs that I supported and pushed for when we began to see this trend was we needed to become more aggressive in policing, so to speak, because that uncollected amount out there could be close to $40 million. So had we been...
Senator, this is one of the questions I think a lot of people are asking. I hear from small business owners who say, listen, I cannot be in any way late with my contributions, how is it possible that large companies, a city council, we heard the Belmopan City Council story, is able to get away without paying their social security, and even more so when it has a direct impact on the worker themselves, who has no choice whether or not it's taken out of their salary?
I agree.
How is it possible?
It is a shame. There's no excuse, and we just need to have better management, better administration, better policing of this, and better enforcement. Because for too long, this has happened in many areas. You know that.
In fact, you're usually advised to go and check and ensure that your contributions are made as an employee before, especially if you're approaching retirement, because you may end up in a situation where you realize some place of employment never paid or never made the contributions.
And it has happened, and things have improved. I must say, and I understand now that they are putting in a system, and I commend them for that, where persons can go online and check their contributions, etc. And that's great. But the fundamental things remain unchanged. These are little stopgaps we're talking about. Unless there's substantive legal reform, which the actuary has called for a long time. And I don't mean reforms that take away benefits. I mean reforms that stop the leakages. I mean reforms that will stop government from picking winners and losers. We have $100 million approximately in BL this year, to which the fund will not receive any income. That's almost 1/5 of our investment money. We have almost $100 million in BTL and Sunshine. As far as I know today, Sunshine Holdings, we still haven't collected, even though government took over that company and nationalized it. So there are major systemic things. The fix to me was not raising premiums by 25%. That's short gap. Even in their own words, it's only going to delay the inevitable, right? 2025. And what are we talking about? We're talking about the point of equilibrium. It's a term that is used to say, look, you're spending more than you're making. And you're bringing. That's all it means, right? It doesn't mean the fund is broke. The fund still has reserves, but it means that we'll be digging into those reserves. So the function of the board and government per se, because ultimately they're responsible for the fund, the Minister of Finance and the government. Their responsibility is, first of all, to safeguard the funds, to maximize the returns on the funds, to stop the leakages on the fund, right? And to grow the fund. This was a well-designed fund allowed to reach this stage because, in my view, primarily due to the lack of legislative will and political interference.
Senator, the message you were putting out this morning differs substantially from the message we're hearing from Social Security, where they speak of the performance of the investments and how that has been able to sustain them to this point today. I
challenge you to go back and to read all the actuarial reports. The last one I saw was 2017. I was trying to get a copy of the one for this year. We haven't seen that yet. But the actuary has been saying for a long time, now granted he's very conservative and he wants his portfolio to remain liquid. That has been a big problem too, is that, you know, the liquid investments of Social Security are now earning 2% or 3% at the most in the banks. So what we tried to do when we were on the board was commence the conversation to do two things. One, maybe the time has come that Social Security needs to invest in its own doctors and hospitals. That's one.
And that's common in other countries.
And that's common in other countries.
Hospital.
And I must say...
And that way, you are able to have a definitive cost to the services that are received.
And I must say that when we were looking at purchasing the hospital, the famous hospital, the UDP and its operatives were very much against it. And I thought that would have been an opportunity for the people of Belize to buy that hospital for about $20 million. It would have been a solid
This would have been healthcare partners?
Yeah. And we were just beginning to look at it, doing the feasibility study on it. And anyhow, but the fund needs to be invested wisely. We thought that maybe one of the things we should have been looking at was hiring a specialist in investments and loans so that we could get premium on our money. Rather than having it sit down earning 2 and 3%, we could be lending out this money more aggressively to the private sector. Private sector really has not borrowed a lot from the fund because
I was going to say that's a touchy issue given the scars or the history of the Social Security Board.
Yes, but we learned from those. Yes, we took a hit from those, but what happened is that we did not make sure that all the T's were crossed and all the I's were dotted. And
isn't it a case where once bitten, twice shy?
Well, perhaps, and we suffer a lot because of the sins of the past, no doubt. But how do you grow the investment portfolio now? How do you grow the returns on those portfolios?
But is that a viable option if there's a government-controlled board? And it doesn't matter which administration is in power.
Look, first of all, it's the responsibility of the board to come up with these ideas and to sell them to government. The government has to be receptive. At the end of the day, the board will do what the government wants to do. It won't look at any suggestion objectively, in my view, and it won't carry through on those things unless it has government's blessings. That's the reality. I'm not going to play around it. Well-intended though the chairman may be, well-intended though the social partners may be, a vast representation on that board is politically appointed, politically motivated. Right? So, I believe, personally, that the stakeholders should have more representation on that board. Yes, the government should be there. The government can even remain the chair. But I think that we need
a majority social
yes,
partner
I think we need to have that objective analysis from people who are not bound to political affiliations,
so
making decisions and plotting the way forward.
That's one option I'm hearing from you. Secondly, you're saying that perhaps looking at offering loans to the private sector locally to be able to gain more returns in a short term.
I'm saying that that is one of the options.
Yeah.
I'm saying the investment portfolio needs to perform better. It's been performing at about 5 to 6%. That needs to be improved. So you have improving the portfolio's performance, legislative reforms, administrative expenses. You have we have to address this matter of evasion, non-compliance, right? And we have to address administratively all the errors. There was a big exercise being done from errors within the department that all the branches were not performing equally. Some were making more errors than others. So it's complex.
Let's go back a bit. How do you begin to address an issue of evasion when you're looking at hundreds, if not thousands, of businesses operating within the country? They hire persons to work, and then they find a way how to go around the system. How do you find them in those nooks and crannies?
It has to be a carrot approach. You have to be able to convince people, I want to make sure you're paying my Social Security. Right? Why? Because I'm getting benefits. People aren't totally convinced that the benefits that they're receiving are worthwhile. And I'll tell you why. If you look at the registration for self-employed people, it's very low, and the registration is selective. It's only those people that think that they can benefit from it with claims, you know. Actually, I think we're losing money, or were at the time I was there, on the self-employed. So we have to make it attractive. For Social Security to be effective, it has to be universal, it has to be fair. Everybody has to pay like anything. You can only have one small group of people paying into this tax base. I want to stick a point here though. I want to say, when we talk about abuse, one of the biggest abusers of this fund, the people in the public service. They have a disproportionate amount of claims against this fund. So it looks like people in the public service are sicker than the rest of the society, which incidentally, the incidences of claims and sickness claims and benefits claims has gone up.
Yeah.
So there's obvious abuse in the system. With I might add, we found out in the past that there are doctors, special doctors that you go to and then give you right away give you all the amount of time off you need or want.
It's hard to mitigate against that, though, because
it is difficult, but that does not mean that you do not address it. And I'm saying one of the possible ways you address it is you have your own health centers and you have your own protocols, so to speak. But it needs to be addressed. You can't just sit back here at the end of the day and, let me finish, and say that the answer is raising premiums 25% because it's too hard to do the other things.
Where would you place that proposal, so to speak, as a medium-term or a long-term solution that you would go into investing in your own facilities and HR?
I think it's something that should have been done a long time ago. I think it's something that needs to be discussed and fully ventilated at the board and sold to the legislators. Like Marlene said, most other countries in the world have their social security, have their own hospitals, they have their own protocols, they have they don't have doctors that answer to anybody else but themselves. So I think that those are the types of discussions you need to have. And the discussions I see right now on the table are primarily surrounded by, yes, we know we have reforms and we'll start to address them, but I don't see them being addressed now, and let's address them with premiums. And I must say, the Chamber of Commerce did try. And they believe that the Social Security acted in good faith and will act in good faith in implementing these reforms that we're talking about. And I hope that they do, because they can't come back to us in 4 years or 5 years and say, we need another increase of 25% on premiums.
Well, I was going to say, the message has been clear at this point that there will be a need in the near future to take a look once again at the structure and perhaps reform. Now, what that means is, does it mean another increase in contribution, or what will take place next? Because, I think people right now are having a hard time adjusting, even if you say increase benefits, to not being able to take home the same amount of money that they have been trying to stretch for such a long time. And I know that, from some outsiders may look at it and see it as a few extra dollars, but those few extra dollars are hard earned and also most necessary in being able to maintain families across this country. So we can't dismiss that fact. And I think that when we hear that this is a situation that perhaps needed to be addressed a long time ago and will need to be addressed again in the near future, I mean, there has to be some form of reform. And my question to you is, what if there has to be one action that is taken at this time, what would that be?
There's no magic bullet. Let's
a priority action.
Well, I think legislative reform is key. I think there are many key things. I think the administrative expenses that the chamber has focused on is key. I think we need to control the errors within the department, the abuse, the fraud that the CEO of Social Security mentions in his communications with the chamber.
It would be remiss of me to not put that back to you as a representative of the business sector. What is the Chamber of Commerce doing, or the business sector doing, to ensure that members are ensuring that they are in compliance? Because it goes both ways. If it's a business member who is not paying Social Security, they're equally as guilty as the Social Security Board who's not collecting.
Agreed, totally. And let me say this to you. We found out that a lot of the abuse, for example, that we were seeing to this system and evasion was taking place in settings like construction, where you had workers like that, and it wasn't a formal office, a formal set business establishment.
Okay.
So we see the employment numbers in this country grow very, how should I say it, minimal growth in the Social Security statistics. Yet the government claims that we have a low unemployment rate. Well, that means that we have a lot of people out there working that the Social Security is not capturing, and this shows it. It says, look, we're only capturing from 69%, okay, of the employed persons. So there's a huge portion out there that are not contributing to the fund. And we have to find a way to find them, or we have to find a way to correct them into wanting to come on board.
So if you're looking at reducing operational expenses, which I believe includes the cost of human resources and what have you, but you are setting out to go and try to collect from the 31% that is out there. Perhaps you'd need persons to go into the field and try to seek out these so-called employers who are evading the system. Wouldn't that cost equally as much?
Well, I think there are other ways to do it. I mean, I think you could do it electronically now. You could have a system where you ask people who are employed to register anonymously. There are many ways that you could do this. But you need to sit down and plan it and do it. And you have to do your homework. I tell you, I mean, I'll be honest with you. A lot of the board members that go to board meetings are not prepared. They're not reading documents, you know, at least when I was there. And I don't see why that should have changed. I mean, so you have to have
and
people
it's $1,000 a meeting, from what I've been made to understand.
At that time, the stipend was $1,000 a meeting. Yes. 4
meetings a month?
No, I think there are months that you have more meetings. But generally speaking, you have a board meeting once a month. There are special board meetings and other meetings. And you know, that to me is insignificant. I mean, because if you really put in your pound of flesh and you do your work and you study, I mean, I remember we used to get board papers this.
But if you're saying that you attend meetings and seldom are other members of the board prepared in terms of having read the documents, coming forward with suggestions that are practical and viable, then essentially they're getting paid to do nothing.
They're not earning.
Yeah.
They're not earning it.
That was my experience when I was there, I'll be honest with you. I mean, there were very few of us on the board that really paid keen interest to what was happening and tried to bring about reform. And you know, sad to say.
Well, Senator, we are out of time. We thank you for a spirited conversation and for shedding light on some of the areas where you feel that there can and should be reform, and we appreciate you coming in today.
Anytime.
All right. We're going to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, we'll be joined by representatives of the Belize Police Department to talk about Police Week, so stay tuned.